Hello, and welcome to the Washington Courts Report, the official podcast of the Administrative Office of the Courts, where I cover some of the most exciting news and programs from the AOC and around the Washington court system as a whole. I'm your host, Patric Haerle, and today we're going to be discussing the Board for Judicial Administration, or BJA, with Pierce County Superior Court Judge Alicia Burton, who co-chairs the association. The BJA consists of judges from all levels of court, along with a few other key stakeholders, who meet monthly to address issues affecting Washington courts. The group is charged with providing effective leadership to the state courts and developing policy to enhance the administration of the court system in Washington state. Judges serving on the board pursue the best interests of the judiciary at large in representing more than 400 elected and appointed judges presiding at the four different levels: the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, Superior Courts, and the District and Municipal Courts. So I'm excited to be joined by Judge Burton to learn more about the association's vital work. So without further delay, let's dive right into today's episode. Well, just to start off, I'd like to welcome Judge Alicia Burton to the podcast. Thanks for coming on, Judge Burton.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm really interested to hear from you a little more about the BJA. So just to get started, how would you say the Board for Judicial Administration provides effective leadership to Washington's courts, especially in a non-unified court system like we have?
So I think we do it in three ways. One, just by our membership and the structure of our membership. We represent all four levels of the court system. So we have members on the BJA that include Supreme Court justices, Court of Appeals judges, Superior Court judges, and then judges from the courts of limited jurisdiction. And each of those, in addition to other key stakeholders that are partners with us in the justice system. And all of those people have a voice at our meetings. All judicial members have a single vote. And so we make sure that collectively we hear from all levels of the court system when we are really trying to speak with one voice on behalf of the judiciary. The second way we do it is in the way that we gather our information. We host monthly meetings, again, that are open to all of our members and our key stakeholders. Our committees and our task forces meet independently of those meetings, approximately once per month. And then we also have a Judicial Leadership Summit that is held every 2 years. And that's where not only do the BJA members, but we invite members of the community from our key stakeholders, associations, members of OCLA, the Washington State Bar. We invite everybody who has an impact on the judiciary to help us identify our priorities, what we need to work on moving forward. And that really gets us going in terms of identifying what our goals are moving forward. And then finally, I mentioned voting. I think it's really important in a non-unified system that everybody has a voice. And the way we do that is that every judge member has an independent vote, and nothing moves forward unless there is an affirmative vote, at least one from each level of the court. So we really make sure that the Supreme Court's heard, the Court of Appeals are heard, Superior Courts are heard, and the courts of limited jurisdiction are heard. And that's really how we are able to get to the point where we can speak with one voice on behalf of the judiciary.
Yeah, that's so important, right? In the non-unified system, having all those different methods to make sure everyone's on the same page, moving in the same direction. Especially because it feels like, courts can be right next to each other and really different in our state. So having something like the BJA, so
yes.
Big.
Very different. I mean, very different between the West and the East, different between, we have very rural courts, we have very large courts, and funding differences. And that's where we see a lot of the impact is on the difference in funding, because we are not a unified system. Our funding comes from local resources. And so in counties that are small and cities that are small, their funding resources are much different than a King County or a Pierce County or Spokane. And so to the extent we can speak with one voice and try to fill those gaps, that's where BJA leadership is so important.
Yeah, and that actually I think segues really well into my next question. One of the main missions of the BJA, tasks they have to do, is develop policy for Washington's courts. But what does the process of developing policy look like, and how do you sort of reconcile, developing policy for something as big as King County to something as rural as maybe a smaller Eastern Washington court?
So like I said, we meet every 2 years for this Judicial Leadership Summit. We're always talking about things that are um, goals of ours or issues that have arose in the judiciary. So, for example, right now we're dealing with a public defender crisis. I think everybody's aware that there is a
Yeah.
shortage of public defenders. So that's been at the forefront of our conversations. So certainly we always are wanting to identify issues that impact the judiciary and those who appear in front of us. And so we do that through judicial leadership summits. We do that through our monthly meetings and just ongoing conversations with our stakeholders about what is impacting them and what we can do to make easier access to justice, the administration of justice go more smoothly. And so we have those conversations, we identify the needs, we focus on our priorities, and then we really operate on a committee and task force model. So we have standing committees, and I'm going to refer to my notes as to what those are, so I don't
Of course.
any. So we have a budget and funding committee, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's responsible for presenting the judiciary budget. It's also key in obtaining funding for all of the courts, and that's where they help with funding in the rural courts that may not have an independent funding source. We have a court education committee that creates curriculum for judicial education, provides scholarships so that courts can or judges can attend education. We have court security that started as a task force. It's now a standing committee in the BJA. Very important committee. It's been really busy lately. I don't think I need to tell you of all of the threats and the safety concerns to judicial officers and the court system of recent. But that is currently a committee that we just created. The legislative committee is a committee that comments on proposed legislation, sometimes presents BJA supported legislation. We have a policy and action committee that talks about what our policies are going to be. We've been working recently on a workplace harassment pilot project. We just created an equity impact assessment tool so that we can make sure that everything that BJA does is through an equity lens, so that we know the impact we're having on the populations that we serve. And then we have our task forces. And so our task forces are usually limited, not only in scope, but in duration. We have two that are currently active, are our alternatives to incarceration. So we're looking at ways to avoid incarcerating individuals, but still keeping our communities safe. We also have a remote proceedings that was created during COVID and has been responsible for multiple court rule changes that allow courts the discretion to proceed remotely for some proceedings. And then task forces that have recently, I guess, sunsetted or have accomplished what they set out to accomplish are our electronic monitoring and victim notification technology task force. That was one that was created out of House Bill 1715. It is authority for DV victims, domestic violence victims, to be notified when the restrained person is near them. It is electronic monitoring that is placed on the restrained person, and then the victim is notified if that person is near them in distance or location. So it's a safety measure. That group created model policies. Certainly funding is a huge issue in that. So they created templates for requesting budget and money for that program. And then
That's
finally, our
huge.
court recovery task, which was also created out of COVID. They came up with so many model policies and suggestions about how to move forward in post-COVID times when courthouses were, some of them, completely shuttered for the pandemic. So we
Wow.
create policy,
Yeah.
we identify it, and then we farm it out to our committees or our task forces, and then they work together they collaborate with our stakeholders, people who are invested in the outcome. They collect data. They create strategy, and then they bring it back to the BJA for us to decide if we want to implement what they are proposing.
Wow, that's an impressive list, and I think I expected something, for court policy to be very well defined and regulated, but that even is all encompassing, and really, you guys stay busy, and that impresses me a
Yes, we
lot.
do. Yes, we do.
Well, sort of leading into my next question about there, you are co-chair of the BJA, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're co-chair for another year or two, I believe.
Yes, I think
Okay.
another year.
All right, great. And what spurred you to wanting to volunteer for the position of co-chair? Because it is a lot of extra work for, no extra pay, and judges are busy people already.
So I have to admit, I did not volunteer for this job. I think I was voluntold. The Chief Justice is ultimately the one who selects his co-chair, and we serve for 2-year terms, and it alternates between the member co-chair always alternates between it being a Superior Court judge for 1 2-year term, and then it goes back to the District Municipal Court judges to be the representative or the member chair for the 2nd year. So when I came on as just a regular BJA member, the member co-chair was a district municipal court judge. I think she's municipal court. It was Judge Bowie. And so when her term ended, it was time for it to be a Superior Court judge. And they choose from the SC or the Superior Court judges that are currently members of the BJA. And so I was one of those that was identified. I am drawn to leadership positions. I have a problem saying no. So when I was contacted by Chief Justice Gonzalez, it just sounded like a really interesting position because I really love the idea of the judiciary speaking with one voice. I think that we, obviously, we're an independent branch of government. A strong BJA means a strong judiciary. And I have to be honest, at the time, I've only been on the bench for almost 5 years now. I didn't know a lot about the way this court system worked. I didn't know the difference really at the time between BJA and SCJA and DMCJ and all of the other acronyms that
Of
we all use.
course.
And so it was a learning experience for me too. And it's just been such a great year and a half to learn about Washington courts and AOC and how we all work together and gosh, our strength in numbers. It's been a really great experience.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on something right there. There are a lot of judicial associations, those JAs that you were mentioning. How does the BJA differ from something like the DMCJA or the Superior Court Judges Association, the SCJA, which I believe you're also a part of?
Yes. So the BJA, like I said, represents all levels of the court and our key stakeholders. And so we speak with one voice in terms of the judiciary in Washington. And so, and then those individual organizations, the SCJA, Superior Court Judges Association, they are clearly representing the best interest of Superior Court judges. DMCJA is representing the best interest and speaking on behalf of district court and municipal judges. And so I was trying to think of an example of where sometimes those interests may be different. And I couldn't think of an example where they're necessarily different, but I could think of one. For example, right now, we're all really focused on judicial education because there's been so much turnover in the judiciary. So many of us are new judges. And so education's been a real focus, I think, at every level, from DMCJA all the way up to the BJA. But in terms of what that education curriculum looks like, that might be different. Certainly, the Superior Court judges are only going to want education or need education on the things that impact us at the Superior Court. So, for example, we've had a complete overhaul in the legislature of our protection orders, of our Guardianship Act. And so those are two big areas of the law that we've required education and training on. Well, district and municipal court judges aren't going to want training on the Uniform Guardianship Act or protection orders if they aren't addressing them in their court system. And so that's an example of where maybe creating a curriculum is going to be completely different between all of the organizations. But yet we all speak with one voice when we say we all want education.
Yeah, of course. Okay, that definitely makes sense. The sort of that key difference, but on the same page still. And one thing I think of is you kind of referenced, I feel like a lot of people aren't super aware of, if they know about the existence of the BJA, they might not know its exact role or its importance even. So I think when those people think of court leadership, they might just think of, the Administrative Office of the Courts, AOC, handling the administrative side of things, or the Supreme Court and Chief Justice kind of sending down, rules or recommendations from above. Why is it so important to have that kind of body representing multiple levels with the BJA rather than just something like the AOC or Supreme Court leading the system?
Well, because I think I said at the beginning, the BJA speaks with one unified voice on behalf of the Washington judiciary. And so if we can have a strong, cohesive, collaborative board of judicial administration, we also have a strong, cohesive, collaborative judiciary, which, as you know, is an equal branch of government. And so it's so important to have all the voices heard. And that's where BJA is such a great organization in terms of bringing all levels of the court together. Everybody has an equal voice. Each level has to approve of action before it moves forward. And so nobody's ever not heard in the BJA. And I think that's a really important thing for our judiciary. If you look at our success over the last few years, you'll see that our strategic focus and our successes have been on issues that impact the judiciary as a whole, regardless of court level, court location, court size. So it's things like court security. It's things like interpreters and access to interpreters and reimbursement for interpreters for all court levels. So it's things that really impact all levels of our court. That's what BJA really focuses on.
Okay, and again, segueing very well into my next question, speaking of BJA's focuses, for the upcoming year or, next few months, are there any goals or upcoming priorities the BJA is really going to be highlighting or focusing on?
Yes, so we just extended our goals. There are goals from 2023 to 2025. And the first goal is to focus on courts of the future. BJA wants to identify and promote innovative court programs, practice, and best practices across the state. We're really focused also on court wellness. That's been the buzzword, I think, amongst all judges, probably across the country. But we're really focused on taking care of not only our judicial officers, but our court staff and any court personnel. And that includes increasing education, making sure that they are well trained and able to deal with the situations that present themselves in courts, and also taking care of their wellness needs. We want to collaborate with all of our justice partners to make sure that we are all speaking with one voice and really promoting what the judiciary needs. And then we'll also consider or also continue fighting for adequate funding across the state, alternatives to incarceration, remote proceedings. Very important that we continue to look at our remote proceeding rules and that we continue to provide funding for technology. So those are our goals for 2023 to 2025 that we'll keep working on.
All right, that sounds like a pretty good list and some pretty important priorities to me. Well, Judge Burton, those were my main questions for you, and I think they were really helpful for just helping me and whoever's listening understand both the role and the importance of something like the BJA. Is there any last message you'd like to end off on?
I don't think so. Just thanks for having me and letting me educate others on BJA. I know that when I came in, I didn't understand how it all worked together. And so hopefully this podcast will help others understand how the BJA overlays all of our judiciary here in Washington.
Of course. Thanks so much for coming on. Paying it forward, sort of.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Have a good day.
And that's all for today's episode. Once again, a big thanks to Judge Burton for appearing on the show and helping shed some light on the processes of such an important group. For more information on the BJA, you can visit www.courts.wa.gov and find the group's page under the Programs and Organizations tab. You'll also find relevant BJA links on our podcast page under the Features section of the homepage of courts.wa.gov. And on behalf of Washington's Administrative Office of the Courts, thank you for listening to this episode of the Washington Courts Report podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, you can subscribe to Washington Courts on YouTube or Washington Courts Report on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where new episodes will be releasing monthly, and you can also listen to past episodes. New episodes will also be posted on the Washington Courts Facebook and LinkedIn pages upon release. Once again, thanks for listening, and have a great day.